And good evening, everyone.
Okay.
Welcome to Hearth of Europa, and I am Lynx, one of the co-hostesses here. And today we are talking about the Arthurian Legends. And of course, there is my co-hostess Katrina.
Mm-hmm. Hello. Yes. And today we have a guest. We have Kenaz Filan, who. Oh, yes.
Hello.
So, Kenaz, you are writing a book about the Arthurian legends, right?
That is correct. The book is called, right now, working title is The Cross, the Grail, and the Ring. It starts with the Christianization of Europe, goes through the Grail legend into fantasy fiction as it starts, of course, through J.R.R. Tolkien and the Inklings, and just some thoughts about what you could learn from that for the bring this. Okay, 1 second.
Are you having a little bit of maybe connection?
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah. I was hearing you pretty well. Is there a delay?
Yes, okay, I noticed that.
Yeah, it can happen. It happens sometimes. It happens on the long way, unfortunately. So yes, you have a book called The Cross, the Grail, and the Ring.
That's right. That's in the works.
And you also have a podcast called Notes from the End of Time, and I've listened to 3 of your episodes about King Arthur and sort of way that you were relating that to what one can learn from it in the context of the collapse of America and the West.
That's exactly
we are in the middle of the collapse.
We are in the middle of the collapse. We also have a bit of a delay. Let's see how long this takes to get there.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you. So I think what you said considerably earlier that I'm getting it. Okay. So we might have to bear with that just a little bit. So yeah. I was interested in episode 18, specifically. You were talking very much about the fall of the Roman Empire and the effect that it had on Britain.
The effect it had on Britain was catastrophic. I mean, it was Britain had always been, kind of the far end of the empire. Britannia was pretty far out there, but when they finally pacified Britain,
yeah, it took a lot. It definitely took a lot for them to pacify Britain. You had they had a lot of rebellions from the Picts, but ultimately I think they more pacified them probably with the bread and circuses and the roads and all the nice amenities that come with living under Roman rule, more than they did with their military. I think
that was absolutely what they got. Was they built roads, they built towns. Britannia was introduced to a lot of European trade, which gave them
yeah, it really gave them access to a lot of stuff, and then things sort of settled down for about 250 years after they finished doing that. But Rome have gotten really very overexpanded, and then of course, as you were saying, in your summarization of this
Just
history.
trying something now. I'm having a little bit of audio problems.
Okay.
Bear with me 1 second here.
Okay.
The night of the audio
Okay, I
issues.
got the headphones. I know. It's always the audio.
Yeah.
Everything else, fine. But audio issues are the leading cause of heart attacks for streamers,
Yeah. And
I think.
we're not even talking about fairies today, so it's a bit unfair.
Don't mention them. Don't mention the she. Don't
Okay,
mention the good people.
I just
Oh.
tried muting the live stream on YouTube. I think I was getting 2 voice signals at once.
Oh,
Let's
I've
see
done that.
if this helps.
Yeah, you can't have the audio on
done
the
that.
tabs.
Yeah, I
because
just
then
I
it
saw
goes.
that, I noticed that, and so I muted it, and now I'm not getting that like delay. So yeah, now it's not hallucinatory again. But yeah, getting back where I was, there was very much they became part of the trade because the Romans needed to raise taxes. You introduced a lot of people who'd been subsistence farmers into town economies, and they really, I mean, it might not have always been gentle, but by and large, Roman rule was pretty good for Britannia. Then at about, near the end of the 4th century, as the Western Roman Empire starts crumbling, they have to pull these soldiers out of Britannia. They've got to get, they have to pull what legions are left. We got to fight against, Rome is getting sacked. We've got to defend Rome, never mind Britannia. So basically, at some point, about near the end of the 4th, beginning of the 5th century, Rome completely abandoned Roman Britain to its own fate. And you enter this period called sub-Roman Britain. And let me just pull up quick. I had a record on, I have some stuff I'd written on that from like Gildas, who described what it was you saw there. It was, I mean, at that point, you've got the Scotai, who are the Irish. You got the Picti, who are like any of the modern day Scots. They realize, well, gee, those centurions aren't here anymore to keep us from raiding Britannia. And so they came back to raiding Britannia. And that just becomes a huge problem. And then, let's see, here we go. I got it. Yeah, that begins about the first record we've got about that is like from a guy named Saint Gildas. He was a Britannic monk. Exactly what he said was, the Scots and Irish seized with greater boldness than before on all the country toward the extreme north, as far as Hadrian's wall. Opposed them there was placed on the heights a garrison equally slow to fight and ill-adapted to run away, a useless and panic-struck company who slumbered away days and light nights on their unprofitable watch. And the hooked weapons of our enemies were not idle, and our wretched countrymen were dragged from the wall and dashed against the ground. Such premature that's what you got. Such premature death was better than seeing the miserable sufferings of their brothers and children. You start seeing famine, and they're like, not only are the people like after this fighting against invaders from Scotland and Ireland, they start seeing civil war amongst themselves and starvation. So it's really, really gets bad. The Britons in 443 send messages overseas to Rome. They're begging assistance. And the Romans, meanwhile, have a guy named Attila, king of the Huns, at their doorstep. They can't really spare anybody. So they sent to the Angles, who are a Germanic tribe, and they say, can you help us out? Vortigern is what he's normally called. That probably just means great leader, like the king of, like, the biggest king in the Britannic region, Vortigern. And he invites Hengest and Borsa over. They come over. They have no problems with the Picts. And then they suddenly start to thinking, We aren't having any problem slaying the people whom our hosts invited us in to fight against. Why don't we just the middlemen and take their land?
Yes. So basically, get Saxons in to help with Picts. Saxons steal your country.
That's exactly what happens. Yep, it's that you get three different groups come out of Germany. The Jutes are from the men of Kent, the Weitvarians, the people who dwell in the Isle of Wight, and the people of kindred of Wessex are generally from the Jutes. The old Saxons, if you got people from Essex or Sussex or Wessex, you probably have some old Saxon ancestry. And the East Angles, Middle Angles, Mercians, anybody north of the Humber, those are the people that came in the Angles. They're from Anglia.
Yeah, and conversely, all your Britons, and I've talked about these sort of genetic maps before. I quite like them. All down the northwest side of Britain, you will see Britons. You will see Britons in Wales. You will see its own sort of weird genetic group in Cornwall, because Cornwall is weird, and you will see Celtic DNA in the Scotland and such areas. You were talking particularly to do with Arthur. So around this time, there's a battle, I think, against Saxons that takes place at Bedon Hill, which they theorize to be maybe Salisbury Hill, because Bath, right?
Salisbury Hill in Bath is one of the big ones. Some people say there's a 5th century fort called the Bedbury Rings. Liddington Castle in Wiltshire near the hamlet of Bedbury. There's every place they've looked, they found evidence of Roman activity. They found evidence of post-Roman activity, but nobody's found the smoking Excalibur yet. Nobody is certain which hill is Badon Hill. I'd say Salisbury Hill's probably, the most popular consideration. That's the one that's really come down. I mean, we don't really know. And one of the first things I realized is the historical Arthur changes so much in the legends. I mean, the legends break with historical Arthur. I mean, probably before historical Arthur, if there was one, was cold.
It really does, actually, because there's all these theories really about where Arthur comes from. I mean, I know in Scotland there are an awful lot of sites about where's the historical Arthur and who's the historical Arthur. And there's several sites. There's like, just in Scotland, there's Ben Arthur. There is the King's Knots in Stirling, which are reported to be like the round table.
Well, I mean, they could well be, because a lot of these sites were connected to the pre-Christian myths that got woven into the Arthurian legend. So it's like, were they connected to the original stories that later on become what we call Arthurian stories? Possibly. I mean, was there probably was at some point a Briton leader who managed to drive back Saxons in a number of battles. When you look at the early reports, they're calling him, I think, a Dux Bellorum, a warlord. He basically had a couple hundred men. He managed to get a few of them together, and they managed to find a defensible position and held it.
Yeah. Exactly. But yeah, it's really a subject of a lot of speculation and debate. And I know England and Scotland will both be possessive over that figure, I think, because there was a Scottish professor, not professor, Dr. Andrew Breese, who is a philologist and Celticist, and argued that Arthur was from Glasgow, and thought his battles in Scotland and Northumberland, based off of certain place names and the history of the Britons. And he argues that the name and place in which Arthur defeated his enemies were all in Scotland, and one of them was near Peebles.
I mean, I guess that could be. It's like when you get back that far, all you can really do is look at the records that came back. I mean, we know there was a lot of fighting going on. I think the best analogy I've heard is kind of like we have to trying to reconstruct that period in Britain is kind of like trying to reconstruct the American West from cowboy and Indian movies. Okay, there's got to be a lot of stuff in there that's inaccurate. We know that there's a lot of stuff that's just in there for a story. But you will know, okay, there was a big war on the American continent. There was a group of indigenous people who fought against settlers, and there was a long-standing battle, and you'd be correct there. You know that there'd been some trade maybe between them. Ultimately, they were forced back onto reservations. That you could find all that stuff in the movies. And it's here. You can find a lot of that stuff in the legend, in the legends and in the early legends. I mean, the Anglo-Saxon chronicles don't say anything about any Breton triumph. They've got from the 455 through the late 9th century, they don't say anything. We do get a listing in the Annals Cambriae, the Annals of Wales, and they place the Battle of Bedon at 516. Now, Gildas said the man who won this was Ambrosius, the son of Roman nobles who'd been slain by Saxon invaders. Okay, we see there again, we're going to tie Arthur to a golden past. This appears to be something we see throughout the time. For Gildas, the golden past was Roman Britain. The Annals Cambriae say that Arthur carries the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ for 3 days and 3 nights on his shoulders, and he could be at Mina on his shield, and the Britons were the victors. So the Annals Cambriae say that in 516, there was a guy named Arthur that drove the Saxons off at the Battle of Bedon in 516. So we have a date and a place there. That's the first historical record that has to do with anything called King Arthur.
And he was said in the stories to have slain this sort of impossible amount of men, as you were saying.
Well, the impossible amount of men, maybe he didn't slay 940 people all by himself, but if a guy leading against a Roman legion would have had about 920 soldiers. So, basically this guy with his men wiped out an entire legion of people. That is possible. Did he wipe out 1,000 Saxon invaders? If they had the high ground and, if he had people with weapons, it's a whole regiment can get taken out.
Yeah, it seems reasonable.
Say, and Arthur said, and Arthur slew. What they meant, it's the same thing as you said. General MacArthur beat back, this whole army at this battle. It's like, well, everybody would know it's General MacArthur leading the battle. You might not know it if you're a scribe and a monk, and you'll have to feel the need to add in there. Did it with his own hand. But what they describe is actually a very reasonable possibility that, Arthur led a winning battle, because they all seem to agree it was invaders. Saxons appear to be the ones that get named most frequently.
Yeah, I would say that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So he's led this winning battle, probably with some sort of tactical advantage, even if he didn't have the numbers, and he's won a particular victory there against the Saxons.
And that appears, and later on, he of course will get reconstructed. If you look at the later legends, T.H. White makes him a Roman, an Anglo-Norman in Once and Future King. You'll see he becomes you know, Victorian England, he just becomes this exemplar of like the perfect, the perfect Englishman.
Yeah, exactly. So the English really reclaim him and use him as sort of a symbol of the nation and of chivalry and of a heroic age for them.
Yeah, that's a very interesting story. That comes in, you get to Thomas Mallory, who we have to talk about, like I'm sure we'll talk about him at some point.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, historically, the other thing was Nennius mentions a story about Vortigern with a young boy, and he has a vision with a tent and two snakes, one red and one white. That'll go out as becomes the prophecy of Merlin. Merlin, of course, a lot of people have traced that to Myrddin, who's like a wild man of the woods, that he was a Welsh wizard. I mean, this is where you start seeing a lot of that Welsh mythology, Celtic mythology, Irish mythology. A lot of this stuff feeds in.
Yes, it really does. And you sort of see the Gaelic original words to things with some of the Scottish sites and stuff feeding to Arthur, or maybe confused with Arthur when you look at some of these Scottish sites. Like there was one called Ben Arthur, which is anglicized to Ben Arthur.
Ben Arthur. That could be Arthur. I'm trying to remember what that means. It's like, again, it means bear, sight of the bear, like anything that sounded like Arthur might have wound up becoming Arthur. But there's a lot of, there are a lot of legends about that. And one of the things I find interesting, well, that's when we're getting into the Grail, the idea that this becomes Christianized later. But one of the first things that jumped out at me is the whole process of post-Roman Britain reforming into the various English areas that it forms into. It is generally a battle of Christian natives against non-Christians. I mean, when the Scoti, when the Picts start raiding Britain, they're not Christian. Once they get Christianized, I mean, there's always been trouble across the border. I'm not saying everybody suddenly started getting along. Things did get considerably less bloody.
Yes. In some respects, everybody still does not quite get along, but things are certainly a lot more peaceful than they ever were.
That was where I started noticing, with the whole development of a European identity, how much of the European identity is tied up in the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of Christendom, and how much that helped us start cementing those various identities that will later on turn into nationalism.
Yeah, exactly. Thing. I'm just thinking about. Sorry, I was just having a little look at the chat. I was just having a look who's in. John Zoak just donated a diamond and said, "I like turtles."
That's wonderful. I like turtles too.
Yeah.
Everybody likes turtles. And I'd just like to say a big thank you to Right Meow and Ferocious Chihuahua for hosting us right now. That's really great of them. Thank you very much, and thank you, Ferocious Chihuahua, for the lemons and ice creams and other miscellaneous objects that substitute themselves to money in D-Life.
Yeah, I thought about doing video streaming, but I've got a face made for audio.
I don't want to have my face out there.
No.
I don't think it's an ugly face. But it's not a great face either. It's a face you can happily go your life without seeing. It's an average face.
I just don't want my face on the internet, period. So I don't post pictures, and I'm behind an avatar. So so yeah, I just also want to tell people that we are now on Entropy with video.
Yeah,
so you can go watch us on there. You can log in with either an Entropy account or your YouTube and I think Twitch. And you can post questions. If you want to post a super chat, you can do that. And you can also subscribe. So
Yeah.
Now you
I
don't.
think it's probably about coming up to the time where we should have a story.
Yeah.
I think.
We have been doing for let's see, half an hour. So yeah, we could put on
Thereabouts.
the first story.
Whoop. You glitched for me a little bit there, Lynx. But yes, we could have Lancelot and Friends.
Yeah.
The first story of the night.
Okay, let's do it.
Sir Lancelot and his friends. Sir Lancelot was acknowledged by all the knights of the Round Table to be the bravest of their number, and the one whom the king loved most. He was not often at court, because he was nearly always engaged in adventures, which took him away from the town of Camelot. The knights were always sorry when he went away, and yet they were sure he would return safely, and with much to tell them. One day Sir Lancelot called his nephew, Sir Lionel, and told him to mount his horse, for they must go to seek adventures. Sir Lionel was very glad, for it was a great honour to be chosen as companion by Sir Lancelot. They rode off through a deep forest, and then across a wide, treeless plain. The sun was shining, hot and bright, and when they reached a clump of trees, Sir Lancelot bade Sir Lionel dismount. Then the two sat in the shade to rest. It was not long before Sir Lancelot fell asleep, while Sir Lionel kept guard. He saw 3 knights furiously pursued by another knight who was very large. The knight overtook the 3 knights, one after another, and overthrew them, and bound them by the reins of their bridles. Sir Lionel, who was very young and self-confident, thought that he would like to fight with this knight. So he mounted his horse, very quietly, without waking his uncle, and rode into the plain. When the big knight saw him coming, he laughed, and rode up quickly. At the very first stroke, young Sir Lionel fell to the earth. The strong knight bound him fast to the other 3 knights, and drove them all to his castle. There he took off their armour and clothes, and beat them with thorny sticks. After that he threw them into a deep dungeon, where there were many other knights. Meanwhile Sir Hector, the foster-father of King Arthur, hearing that Sir Lancelot and Sir Lionel had gone in search of adventures, determined to join them. So he rode hastily in pursuit. When he had gone some distance through the forest, he met a woodcutter, and asked him if he had seen Sir Lancelot and Sir Lionel. The man replied that he had not. "Then do you know of any adventure which I can seek?" asked Sir Hector. The man answered, "Sir, a mile from here is a strong castle. On one side of it is a large stream, and by that stream a large tree. At the foot of the tree is a basin of copper. Go and strike on that 3 times with your spear, and you will meet with an adventure." "Thank you heartily," said Sir Hector. He rode on, and soon came to the tree. Hanging on it were a great many shields, and among them Sir Lionel's. There were also shields which belonged to other knights of the Round Table. Sir Hector knew that the knights must be prisoners, and he grew very angry. He struck sharply on the copper basin, and at once a huge knight appeared. "Come forward and fight," cried the knight. "That I will," said Sir Hector. "But I shall win," said the knight, "for I am the great Sir Turquaine." Sir Hector had heard of this powerful knight, whom so many of Arthur's lords had tried in vain to overthrow. But he was a brave old man, and so he began to fight fearlessly. He wounded the big knight once, but the knight wounded him many times, and at last overcame him. He picked Sir Hector up and carried him under his right arm into the castle. "You are very brave," he said, when they had reached the great hall. "You are the first knight who has wounded me these 12 years. Now I shall give you your freedom, if you will swear to be a follower of mine." "I shall never swear that," said Sir Hector. "I am a follower of King Arthur." "I am sorry for that," said Turquaine, "for now I must treat you as I do all my other prisoners." Then he took off Sir Hector's armour and clothes, and beat him with the thorny stick, and threw him into the dungeon. There the old man found Sir Lionel, and many other knights. "Is Sir Lancelot here?" asked Sir Hector feebly. "No," said Sir Lionel, and told how he had left Sir Lancelot sleeping. Then Sir Hector became cheerful. "Sir Lancelot will surely find us," he said, "and give us our freedom." But Sir Lancelot still slept on under the tree. Soon 4 beautiful ladies rode by, and, seeing a sleeping knight, dismounted to look at him. They at once recognized him as Sir Lancelot, the bravest knight in the land. One of these ladies was Morgan le Fay, whom Arthur had forgiven for her treachery to him. She said to her companions, "I will cast a spell over him, and we will carry him to my castle. Then, when he wakes, we will make him choose one of us as his wife." The other 3 agreed, and Morgan le Fay cast her spell. Then the 4 women lifted the knight up on his horse, and went with him to the castle of Morgan le Fay. They put the knight in a richly decorated chamber, and left him. In the morning he awoke, and wondered where he was. Soon a fair damsel entered with food, and he asked her to explain how he came to be in that place. "Sir, I cannot," she said, "but I can tell you this much. You are under a spell. In 12 hours the spell will break, and perhaps I can help you then." After the damsel had gone out, the 4 ladies entered. They were clad in the most beautiful robes. One had on silk that looked like the foam of the sea. Another had on velvet that seemed like moss from the forest. The third wore satin that was the colour of maple leaves in the autumn. Morgan le Fay wore a robe that looked like a storm cloud, and her diamonds were like stars. "Choose one of us for your wife," she said, "and you shall be very happy." But Sir Lancelot said, "Fair ladies, I have no wish to marry. I would rather fight for my good King Arthur, who needs me." At this all the ladies were angry. "You shall stay here till you choose," they said, "and if you will not choose, then you shall die in prison." They went out, and Sir Lancelot remained alone all day. At dusk the fair damsel came to him. "My lord," she said, "the spell is broken now, and I can help you. These ladies are not kind to me, and I am going to run away. I will take you with me on one condition." "Name it, damsel," he said. "I am a king's daughter," she said. "My father is King Bagdemagus." "He is a good man," said Sir Lancelot. "I know him well." "My father has been fighting in a tournament," said the maiden, "and has been overcome with all his knights. He feels very sad. Now in 2 days there will be another tournament at which he must fight. If you help him, he will surely win, and be happy again." "I will gladly help him," said Sir Lancelot. Then the damsel bade him walk softly with her. She opened 12 great doors, one after another, Each had a lock with a key so heavy that the maiden had to use both hands to turn it. At last they reached the courtyard, and there she gave Sir Launcelot his horse and armour. She also mounted a horse, and the two rode away. After riding all night, they came to the court of King Bagdemagus. He was overjoyed to welcome Sir Launcelot, for well he knew that none could overcome that good knight in combat. All day there was music and dancing and feasting. Sir Launcelot, however, could not be merry. He kept on thinking of his nephew, Sir Lionel, and wondering where he was. On the morning of the tournament, Sir Launcelot asked King Bagdemagus to furnish him with a white shield, because he did not want to be known. The king did so, and also gave each of the 3 knights who rode with him a shield of the same colour. Sir Launcelot went with the knights into a little leafy wood near the field where the tournament was to be held. Meanwhile King Bagdemagus rode to the tournament with 60 men, and met there the King of Northgalis with 80 men. They began to fight, and soon those on the side of King Bagdemagus began to be worsted. Then Sir Launcelot, with the 3 knights, dashed out of the little wood and into the thick of the fight. No one could stand against Sir Launcelot. One of King Arthur's knights, Sir Mordred, the brother of Sir Gawain and Sir Gareth, was fighting against King Bagdemagus. Not knowing who Sir Launcelot was, he rushed on him. Sir Launcelot unhorsed him, but would not hurt him, because he was a knight of the Round Table. Years afterwards he was sorry he had not killed him, for Sir Mordred proved to be a traitor to King Arthur. Sir Launcelot fought so well that for his sake all the prizes of the tournament were given to King Bagdemagus, who was greatly rejoiced, and offered large gifts to Sir Launcelot, and begged him to be his guest for a time. But Sir Launcelot was so anxious to find out what had become of Sir Lionel that he could not remain. So the next day he set forth. He rode back towards the clump of trees where he had fallen asleep, while Sir Lionel kept watch. On the highway he met a damsel, riding on a white palfrey. "Fair damsel," said Sir Launcelot, "can you tell me of any adventures hereabouts? I am Sir Launcelot of the Lake." "O Sir Launcelot," said she, "it is indeed fortunate that you have come, for there is a knight named Sir Turquaine, who has put in prison many of the knights of the Round Table. You shall fight with him for the freedom of your friends." Then she turned her horse, and Sir Launcelot gladly followed her. She brought him to the tree on which hung the shields of his brother knights. Sir Launcelot let his horse drink a little water, and then he struck on the iron basin at the foot of the tree so fiercely that the bottom fell out. No one appeared, however. Then he rode up to the castle of Sir Turquaine. Near the gate he met the big knight. He was on foot, driving his horse before him. On the horse lay a knight, securely bound. Sir Launcelot recognized him as Sir Gaheris, the brother of Sir Gawain and Sir Gareth. "Put down the knight," said Sir Launcelot. "Mount and fight." "Gladly," said Sir Turquaine. "Before long you will be sorry for your challenge." Then the two rode at each other. Their horses' feet beat the dust into clouds, and they used their swords so fiercely that their armour rang continually, like the clanging of heavy bells. They fought until they were breathless, each bleeding from many wounds. Then Sir Turquaine, leaning on his sword, said, "By my faith, I have never fought with such a strong man before. I admire you, and I would be your friend. You fight as they say that knight does whom I hate most in all this world. You are not that knight, I give you my friendship, and shall free all my prisoners for your sake." "That is well said," replied Sir Launcelot. "Tell me who this knight is whom you hate so much." "He is Sir Launcelot of the Lake. For hatred of him I kill or imprison all knights of the Round Table whom I can find." "Then let us begin to fight again," said Sir Launcelot. for I am Sir Lancelot of the Lake." Then they struck at each other furiously, and soon gave each other so many wounds that the ground was covered with blood. Sir Turquaine was a brave man, but he was not so strong as Sir Lancelot. After a long conflict, he fell, mortally wounded, to the ground. Then Sir Lancelot unlaced his helmet, and eased him as well he could, till he died. Afterwards he left Sir Turquaine, and went to the porter, who held the keys of the castle. Sir Lancelot took the keys, and unlocked the doors of the prison. He led the poor knights out into the daylight, and struck off their chains. Sir Lionel and Sir Hector were overjoyed to see that their deliverer was indeed Sir Lancelot. Each knight found his own armour in the armoury, and his own horse in the stables. After that a servant came with 4 horses laden down with venison, and the poor knights, who for a long time had had nothing but bread and water, enjoyed a good meal. Then Sir Lancelot rode away in search of new adventures.
Okay, so that's our first story for tonight. And an interesting one. It's definitely one that has a lot of elements to it, including 4 women going on a stroll and kidnapping a knight. That is a bit special, you could say.
Just go on a stroll, see a nice knight, think these may be husband material, pack him up on your horse and ride off.
I wonder how...
Normal Dark Ages behavior, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that jumps out that story with me there. One of the things I see that I found really interesting was the way knights engage each other. You have this ceremonial conflict where, basically come and fight. Okay, gladly. They wound each other. There's even there a level of respect for the knights between each other, like, okay, you're a brave knight. I would submit to you if you weren't the one knight I hate more than anybody else in the world. Well, who's that knight? Well, that's Lancelot. Well, tough luck, buddy. The extra line, and tried to comfort him as he died. And that's something I've noticed with chivalry. There were 2 interesting strains that come in when you start creating that whole cult of chivalry, the idea of chivalry. One of them was the Britannic stuff, which this comes into France, and it becomes, a lot of these stories become, there's the Matter of France, the Carolingian tales, the tales of Charlemagne. You have the Matter of Rome, and that's the Greek and the Roman stories. And then you get the Matter of Britain, and those were the Arthurian stories.
Mm-hmm.
And the other group that comes in that I find very interesting is about late in the 9th century, early in the 10th century, that there's a group of Northmen who settle in an area on coastal France along the English Channel, and they become the Northmen, or as they become known, the Normans. And I see a fair bit of the Havamal.
Yes.
I see a fair bit of that Norse, that Germanic warrior code that gets embodied into there.
I kind of wonder why Sir Turquaine hates Sir Lancelot when he doesn't know him if he looks him in the face.
Well, when I'm looking at another version of the story says, and I, Tarquin, hate you because you killed my brother. So there we get another old thing, the blood feud.
Yes, that makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah, how many Norse sagas involved, somebody gets killed and the body count goes up to 3 figures before it's done.
Yeah, that kept going into the 1500s over here. That was a long-standing tradition, you could say.
Yeah, and I think that to me is an interesting thing, is how you manage to get a lot of these elements from the sagas and from Norse culture. Of course, with the English, you've got the Old English stuff. Beowulf started out like the best guess now is Beowulf. The original tale of Beowulf started out in the region of modern day Denmark.
Yeah. But the Norse warriors also got around.
Yeah, England was under Danelaw for a while.
Yeah, and they were reputed all over the continent, and used as bodyguards for kings and popes and all of that. So they were reputed for their high standard, in that they would defend the king with their life, no matter what. So they had that standard that was really, really high. And part of that was a lack of fear of death. Whether they died or lived, they would win no matter what.
Yeah, there is very much that. And I think that's something that doesn't really, the Normans, once they converted, the Rollo, I believe he was baptized in exchange for I will swear fealty to this French king. And in exchange for I will take his daughter to wife. I will protect this land, and I will protect the Seine and the French mainland from northern raids. And the Northmen discovered that the only thing that was going to keep the Northmen out was a gang of other Northmen telling them, "Don't come here."
Indeed. That seems to be the same case with the Germanic tribes and the Goths and the Norsemen. If you wanted to beat them, you had to use their own. So that kept going until the Gothic rule in Spain failed, basically.
I'm actually doing another project on that right now, the Visigoths and the fall of the Umayyads and the rise of Mozarabic Christianity, but that's a whole story in itself. The Visigoths, unfortunately, were good warriors. I'm not sure they were really good politicians or administrators. I mean, basically, Hispania spent a couple centuries fighting with each other, religious wars, but I can't. Of course, the Umayyads, when they fall, they can't pacify the Visigothic Christians, and so things just get rougher and rougher till finally you get the Reconquista.
Yeah, Archaeologos have a video on that, and his takes are very interesting. He seems to think that they fought battles mainly just to exercise their army, smaller battles against, smaller tribes and everything. And their moral standard were very high, but they didn't play the political game. But they had certain subversive groups within them who wanted to do that, and basically ended up doing a lot of shenanigans, including poisonings and everything. And that way,
opening the gates at Toledo. Yeah.
But before that, the family lines, the people grew to a very old age, and suddenly they started dying off in their 40s. So there definitely seems to be something mysterious going on there, and quite possibly some foul play. So. But that is definitely another deep dive.
People have written books on that subject, but no, what you definitely see, Lancelot first appears in, I want to say, is it the Vulgate cycle? It's these late 12th, early 13th century poems get written down. Lancelot becomes a really popular character with the troubadours because he's also the embodiment of courtly love with this unconsummated, pure platonic love for Queen Guinevere. which
Pure
of course,
platonic, huh?
well, that's the ideal. Of course, the other thing that happens is,
Yeah.
the courtiers and troubadours also realized that, well, this courtly love not infrequently leads to uncourtly adultery.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
there's one case, if I could find it again, it was in the 13th century. A few knights who'd actually read a lot of romance, they were like minor nobles, were courting the king's daughters, or it was just king, or like a person who was very close to the French throne, were courting their daughters, and they had the whole courtly love affair going on, and wound up getting emasculated with red hot iron pliers.
Ooh.
I mean, no, courtly love was like fun to sing about. If you got caught practicing courtly love with a noble lady, it did not go well for you.
Yeah.
Ouch. Yeah, that sort of leads into what I was about to ask about what you thought Lancelot represented primarily in the tales. Because I think there's two versions of him that represent two different things.
Lancelot, to me, it's the really interesting thing about Lancelot is he's just represents this huge dichotomy between love and duty. I mean, he's the best knight Arthur has. He's, he does all these magnificent feats. He does them for love of Guinevere. I mean, the love of Guinevere is how he rises to that pinnacle, how he becomes such a great knight. And the love for Guinevere is also ultimately what destroys him. I mean, in Greek tragedy, that's hamartia. That's a tragic flaw. It's the thing that makes you great is the thing that destroys you.
Yeah. Yeah, I can really see that sort of archetype there.
Yes,
with him, definitely. Just to shout out Lernende Jald English. I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, but Lernende Jald English is in the chat. A great channel for learning Old English. If you wanna.
Oh, I would be interested. Like that's, studying the ring. Of course, J.R.R. Tolkien was a great advocate of Old English. There is some really, really beautiful stuff. Old English is just, the way you can put words together, you can take these simple concepts and make such wonderfully nuanced. It's a really beautiful language. I'd really love to learn more about it. It sounds
absolutely beautiful, yeah. Beautiful language.
The again bite of inner wisdom. That's their word for like remorse.
Did Lancelot fight against the Saxons as Arthur did? Well, I presume insofar as Lancelot and Arthur existed.
Lancelot, and I've seen one, Lancelot would have been an archetype of Lancashire. Lancelot, that would have been, the spear of Lancashire. But the thing I would say, I've also seen Lancelot connected to Celtic heroes. When you start seeing him in like the 11th, 12th century stuff, you see Arthur fighting Saracens, which of course, by the Baden Hill was at 20 years, I think, before Muhammad is even born. So he becomes, you see that, you'll know, like, you see historical anachronisms that keep coming up in myths. You see it today. You can take a look at a movie from the 80s that's set in the Middle Ages and the women are wearing 80s eyeshadow. I mean, myths tend to get rewritten for their contemporary audience. But Lancelot, to me, he's the most interesting and the most human character typically in the cycle.
Yeah, he really is. He's probably the most sort of relatable in his flaw, which is kind of unrequited love, because I don't think he actually ends up having sex with Guinevere, does he? It's someone in the shape of Guinevere. In some
that happens once there's like nobody ever, like, the chivalric writers were courteous enough never to put them, like, never to give us them in flagrante delicto, but it was pretty strongly implied that there was more going on there than courtly love. What's interesting is one of the early reports of Arthur's death mentions Camelot and Mordred. And one of the things that Mordred does is steals Arthur's wife, Gwendahara, or in some things, she agrees to work with him to steal Arthur's throne. So there were early reports that Arthur's wife wound up going over to the other side. Or what, did she have much of a choice in the matter? I mean, if in 6th century Britain, I just conquered your husband, you are now my queen. It's like that seems to be something that was mentioned in the very early reports, and then it turns into this love triangle between Lancelot, Arthur, and Guinevere.
Yeah. And you see that sort of mirrored in a lot of the interpretations going forward, particularly the modern ones. They do quite like to focus on it. There's been a diamond fight in the chat.
Yeah.
I agree, said he'd have to bail to YouTube, and Donna's Oak is like, get wrecked.
Yeah.
They're fighting with diamonds.
Yeah.
Oh dear. There's less
Thank
expensive way to fight.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. The name you were sure you butchered, and I won't even try. Engelsik is the last word. I'm not going to try with the other ones. Anyway.
Lernende Jald Engelsk, I think.
Yeah. There's a question
I
there.
tend to go a bit Germanic.
Yeah. The question is, did Lancelot fight against Saxons as Arthur did?
I think by the time Lancelot is introduced into the myth, the Saxons are the English. Now, you'll see in some of the names of Arthur's knights, I mean, you have names like Gawain, which are clearly Britannic. You have people in the Round Table who are like clearly have names which would be more Saxon. You even have like knights coming in. By the time you get the 11th century and the 12th and 13th century, he's got knights coming in from all over the world because they've heard, this is the greatest collection of knights in the world, and I want to join it. But Arthur, even by the time of the Norman conquest, Arthur becomes this symbol that unites all the people of Britain. As you said, everybody identifies with Arthur. It's like not even such he's fighting Saxon knights. He might be fighting alongside Saxon knights in one story. He might be fighting a knight with a Saxon name in the other. He's at this point, Camelot, by the time you get to this level, has gone well beyond 5th century Britain. It's now become this kind of mythical place that has never been but always will be.
It's become an archetype.
Yeah.
Very much.
Utopia, yeah. That's interesting. Like I do agree. There was this going back to that sort of debate between the one guy who said Arthur was definitely Scottish and a Glaswegian. I did to some extent agree with the scholars refuting him that Arthur is in a lot of places and Arthur is an everywhere and nowhere person. He's become something beyond place.
He's beyond time and he's beyond place, but he's quintessentially English. That's the thing I find. I mean, to me, the Arthurian cycle did for England what the Homeric poems did for creating a Greek identity.
And I need to speak definitely English, not just as a whole in Britain.
English, there were other poems, other cycles which helped create a Welsh identity. You know, there are certainly stories which have created a Scots identity, but that whole idea of a unified a Britannia, a unified England, that seems to center around the court of the myths of King Arthur and the Arthurian cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I lost track of my thoughts for a second just
No,
then.
this happens to be all the time. I mean, yeah, I think one of the things that is wonderful to me about England is you can have that English identity, you know, you can have that Manx identity, the Cornish identity, the Welsh identity, and still see yourself, or you, for a time you could, I'm not sure you still can at this point, see yourself as part of a greater Britannia. I mean, I think that, you know, I think that has become so diluted and so attacked nowadays that it's starting to fall apart, but we'd probably get in a great deal of trouble were I to get into further details about that.
Oh yeah, discussing who should split off and who should not. That's automatically a very, very controversial topic. I mean, I think even some people in Cornwall, if they had it their way, would just be a separate country, which is not going to be feasible for them, but oh well. But yeah.
Didn't Geoffrey of Monmouth sort of set out with his tale to create, you know, a unifying myth?
I think he very much did. He set out to create a unifying myth, and he just, by the time Geoffrey of Monmouth has done, Arthur has gone to war and he's beat back the Romans. He's done all the, you know, he's taken Iceland, he's taken Scandinavia. He now rules over this enormous empire. I think he's had Merlin move Stonehenge from Ireland into, like, you know, its current location, which, I mean, it's this obvious story of, like, just, it's a huge tall tale, but it begins to, like, a lot of it gets taken seriously. You know, at the time, you also have Glastonbury Abbey is trying to rebuild after a fire and get some new patronage. And so Glastonbury Abbey becomes this site of pilgrimage for people who want to come and see the tombs of Arthur and Guinevere. And it's also interesting there to me is one of the big reasons they promoted the tombs of Arthur and Guinevere, which were sadly wrecked in the Reformation, was, I mean, it was for tourism income, but it was to tamp down this story, which was still centuries later prevalent among the Britannic people, that someday Arthur was going to come back from Avalon and be the king again. The idea that he was literally going to come back from, he was not dead, he was mortally wounded.
I had a bit of a thought about that, and it sort of reminded me of the whole Prometheus thing. You know, because not some people don't know, but there's a second part to the Prometheus myth where he's not just getting his liver ripped out by eagles every day. The gods are going to have to set him free at some point at the end times. I didn't get taught that bit about the myths ever, but they're going to have to set him free in the end times because they need that sort of spirit, I guess, that Promethean spirit. And I wonder if the return of Arthur is something about the return of a will in that sort of manner as well.
I think it means, to me, you know, again, like Arthur and the Grail Legends, the thing that jumps out is, you know, that renewal of a spirit. You know, they're going after, they have an ideal, they have a code of honor. You know, they're using, you know, to use what T.H. White said, they're not might makes right. It's like, you know, might is right. It's might makes right. You know, we're going to stand up for disadvantaged people. We're going to stand up for the weak. We're not going to, not only are we not going to bully the poor and vulnerable, we're going to protect the poor and vulnerable. And that's, That's a very interesting idea, and I think that's something that really resonated with people during the Crusades, and I think it's always really resonated with us because it's a
Mm.
good ideal.
Yeah, and it
Yeah, and it's been nice to people.
yeah, and it also echoes the thought of the elite in the society. You know, the king and the great warriors and everything, that they are. You know, they're not there to lord over the people. They're there to guide them and to help them and to protect them. And that view is very much lost these days, including how both the elite act, but also how people view the elite. So that relationship is more or less gone these days. But in my view, that is the best way for a society to work.
My personal take with that is like what we have been told in the West today is you can be whatever you want to be and you can do whatever you want to do. And the problem is when you tell people that 999 out of 1,000 are going to desperately ask you, well, can you tell me who I am and tell me what I'm supposed to do? I mean, we are pack animals. We need a pack leader.
Yeah.
You know, you can't rechange. We're pack primates. You can't go in and change that wiring. You know, we have a need for those heroic father figure warrior types.
Yeah, and also we have a desperate need for the strong masculine element that is so much lacking today. Basically, the axle of the cart is broken. Basically, there's no center point anymore, which in many ways is the masculine role of that male strong leader, and we definitely have to get back to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what's called toxic masculinity today used to just be called masculinity.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I don't even know what toxic masculinity is, so it's just moronic for me. I just have to step away for 2 minutes, so please go on.
Yeah, Link probably has to let the cat out.
Yeah.
Link's cat always wants out during the stream. Yeah, but it's interesting. Yeah, you're saying the sort of need for a heroic father figure is more sort of what Arthur represents, and I can really get behind you there. I kind of wanted to ask you a bit, just moving on, about you were saying about the original compilation of this by Thomas Mallory, and how he was a little bit sympathetic to Lancelot, maybe because of events that he saw happening in his time in his day. Like, who was he? Just as kind of briefly.
Thomas Mallory was probably born around 1415 to 1420, and of course 1415 he would have been born at the year that the English had their big victory over the French at Agincourt. That was all of a sudden the Knights of Chivalry came charging forward boldly into battle, and they discovered that like armor isn't real helpful against longbows.
Nope.
And that
Probably
was
not.
like basically, those commoners who were using that common longbow, yeah, maybe it won't pierce your armor, but they discovered like your horse takes one to the flank, your horse has suddenly become a guided missile heading back towards your lines.
Yeah.
That was
I guess
not,
because
they got
your horse
slaughtered.
just panicked. Yeah.
Mallory was the first member of his family to take a knighthood in, I think he was like the third generation. Like his grandfather and his father had both qualified to be knights, but they're always listed as squire because being a knight was expensive at that time. His home was called Newbold Revel. What they used to call it in the locals was Finney Newbold. I mean, for our American listeners, that's basically calling it Newbold Swamp. It wasn't particularly wealthy.
Swamp, yeah.
Yeah, it's basically swamp. You kind of got this swampy, muddy patch of land here. You're wealthier than most of the townspeople around you, but you're not, by no means, you like your family. Yet Mallory becomes a knight. So that tells me, from an early age, he was really, really fascinated by knighthood. He also probably saw service near the end of the 100 Years' War. He had a cousin who was at Calais. That was probably one of his first assignments. And he basically saw the English get their tails handed to them at the end of the war. The English lost their holdings in France. So he goes back to that. He's seen this. He may have come in there thinking this was all going to be glorious like those old stories. And he had a pretty good taste of defeat. And when he comes back home after the 100 Years' War, King Henry VI is a pious guy. He's a very religious man. He just wasn't a very good king. And when he finally hears they've lost at Castellon, he has a mental break. He becomes essentially catatonic. Then you start having a battle over the people that are going to run things while Henry's not well. And that's between the House of Lancaster, which supports the Queen Margaret, and the king's son, and the House of York. And this becomes the battle between Lancaster and York, of course, is the White Rose and the Red Rose. So Mallory gets embroiled in the Wars of the Roses.
Yes.
The Wars of the Roses, what I find funny is it was basically most of the wars were more like battles between fans of two FCs. One guy would yell, up Lancaster and up your arse, up Warwick. And then they'd all get together and beat each other with sticks. Then, basically the town constables would come in, put them all for the night, and they'd let them out, and then they'd go and do it again. There were a few big battles. It was mostly squabbling between lords. And it just reminded me of this is like Liverpool and Manchester are having at each other.
Lancashire and Yorkshire still have beef. And Liverpool and Manchester, they still don't like each other.
So that was more what it was. And basically Mallory was able to organize men around there, and he was, some of the stuff he's accused of, let's see, extorting from a miller over the course of 2 years, 2 counts of rape, several counts of pillage and burglary. I mean, the guy was just very much nothing like the knights that he wrote about. And he winds up spending about a decade in prison. Henry VI winds up in prison. York comes in, then Lancaster comes back, then York comes back. Then like the last Richard, Duke of Gloucester, starts pushing to get power himself. He kills the dukes. That was finally what I think just repulsed everybody, and that was what ended the war. Was Richard finally? It's like, okay, Richard, we've been seeing this stuff for decades. You just crossed the last line. We don't kill children, even if they're royal children.
Yeah, so everybody's just like, this war we're fighting has gotten really immoral. Let's just stop now. I'm disgusted with myself, with everything.
And while Mallory's in prison, he starts translating all this French stuff into English prose, and that becomes, he called it the whole book of the Knights of King Arthur. But what it finally winds up, like Caxton prints it, is the Mort d'Arthur. And it's one of the first books to really get distributed widely with the printing press.
Yeah, so he's really got wider distribution than anybody's ever had before,
Yeah, it's
which
one of
is
the
quite an
first
advantage.
fiction bestsellers. It just really, really took off. And one that I find interesting is Caxton made a few changes to the manuscript. There's this story in the manuscript where Arthur dreams that there's this bear who's a horrible tyrant across the country, and then a red dragon comes in and kills it with his sword. Now, Caxton changes the boar to a bear. A bear to a boar. And of course, and the boar, of course, is the symbol of Richard III. And Edward, who comes in to be the king, comes in with a red dragon. I mean, the Tudor king, the first Tudor king, comes in with the red Welsh dragon because he could claim, he kind of had a loose claim on descent from Cadwallader. It wasn't necessarily enough to get him to the throne, but he was enough to get him a few thousand Welsh soldiers that were willing to fight with him, and that was enough to get him to the throne.
Yeah, so he gets some backup from the Welsh.
The Welsh basically helped him. But Caxton changes it to have Richard overthrown by a dragon, and it's basically printed not long before the Battle of Bosworth Field. So it's like, then the first child they have, they name Arthur Tudor, and he will become, he basically is supposed to marry, he's supposed to marry this princess, and they marry, they never consummate the marriage because he gets sick. They're still basically young. I want to say he was like 16. So they wind up marrying her off to Arthur's brother. There's never been an official King Arthur yet in the English Chronicles, but there almost was. But instead, Henry VII, the Tudor king, gave it to his second son, who was Henry VIII. And she ends up becoming the first wife of Henry VIII. And the printing press.
We all know Henry VIII had no fertility problems, just a bit of a problem with the gender he wanted. Yeah, well, I think the problem Henry VIII had with the sex, he had a lot of sex, was, I've heard speculation. Did Henry have syphilis? Did Henry have a brain tumor? When I saw the injuries he would have gotten falling off that horse in the joust, and they talk about the separating sores on his legs, I mean, the man was in constant serious pain. That tends to make you cranky and paranoid. It does. Yes.
I've lived with chronic pain for quite a few years, some years back, and it definitely changes who you are. It's a bit hard to explain, but you're not that happy, everything is fine person anymore, and the pain I had wouldn't be anything compared to what he had. So that was definitely a big part of his problem in his after he had his fall.
Yeah, I mean, I think the chronic pain could explain it. There could have been a head injury. I think they said he was insensible for hours, which today would be like you'd be staying in the hospital for a while with that.
Yeah.
But he also, the same printing press that made Morte Arthur really popular also sparks the rise of the Protestant Reformation. And then England becomes, and England winds up going from being a Catholic country to an Anglican country.
Yeah.
Yes. Catholic country to an Anglican country with quite a few burned monasteries and beheaded wives along the way. Yes.
Yeah, it was not an easy transfer of power. That was not, but I think that sparks something. I've always found it interesting that the countries that became the European countries that became Protestant or largely Protestant were all so far as I could tell, Nordic and Germanic speaking. Protestantism, it existed. It never took control in the countries that were really central to the Western Roman Empire. I mean, Britannia was kind of an exception but Britain, as I said, they never had that strong a hold on it. To me, one of the big things with Roman Catholicism was it was an effort to recapture the Roman Empire in a Europe that was basically falling apart and just started looking back toward that past.
Yeah, I definitely think within the Germanic lands, one of the major issues was leaving that much power to Rome. They didn't want that. It went against their independent spirit in many ways. Of course, it's also power, but I do think it's also that sense of independence at play.
I noticed the Germans, the Norse, the Swedish, never really wanted to expand all that much past the areas they were already in. I mean, even the famous World War II thing, Hitler was trying to grab lands with German-speaking majorities. He didn't, that there's never been that kind of spirit like we have to take over the world, which is something like Germans are regularly accused of for, in my opinion, no good reason. That's, I also find it interesting that the Germanic and the Norse gods, if you went to Rome, you could find a temple to gods from all over the world. You could find temples to Phoenician gods. You could find temples to Egyptian gods. Nobody who wasn't Germanic or Norse ever built a temple to Wotan or to, and really they never gathered a lot of worshipers outside there. Those cultures and those gods just never really seemed to show a lot of interest in expanding much outside their Innengard.
Yeah, and even the times when the Goths took control over the Roman Empire, they didn't impose their own culture. They let the Romans be Romans. They just went in and established a bit of order when things were starting to collapse.
Yeah, I mean, when the last Western Roman emperor, they basically I want to say the boy was 15 at the point, because he was the only one they could really talk into getting onto the throne, because everybody, you wanted to rule the Western Roman Empire like you wanted to be the captain of the Titanic.
Yeah.
Nobody else would it. And, and Aloedas, I think his name, gets there. He looks at this kid and he's just like, look, I'm not going to kill you. It's just, you're going into a monastery. We're going to give you a payment. I'm taking over here. And I mean, the Romans, there was only one way to retire from being a Roman Empire and Roman emperor in Roman culture.
Yeah, and at a certain point, nobody wants the job.
Yeah, and it's nobody. He could have killed him. He didn't. Again, that's something I see for all the things. I'm sure the fury of the Northmen was really bad if you're on the receiving end of it. But I've also always noticed there's a definite warrior code of honor underlying that.
Yeah, there definitely is. So, and also part of that is they don't want to come in and dominate, and put other people down. So that's an interesting trait.
Yeah. Europeans have always been a lot nicer with their empires than some other people have.
Yeah,
definitely. We've really been quite a lot nicer in many situations.
I really think
had or tried to have them.
Yep. 15 years from now, Africans are going to basically be a wholly owned subsidiary of China Inc. And they're going to look back on the good old days when, like, all you really need to worry about was some drunk boar chasing you with a sambak. I mean, it is like, I don't think you understand.
Goodness.
We have more out-group preference and empathy then like that's something, in fact, I find striking about Europeans. Not that we're all wanton and genocidal, but we seem to have more concern for outsiders than most other cultures do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're gonna have to put this on library or Odyssey. It's a that sort of stream. I feel like
yeah.
will YouTube even have it? I don't even
Yeah.
know. Oh
Um,
dear. We should
there-
play another story soon, I think.
Yeah,
I think we should.
maybe
Yeah,
my
Oh dear,
comment will
oh
be a
dear.
bit spicy. I
No.
don't know.
But it
Um,
is like that's something, and I think a lot of that comes from Northern Europe. But it also came Rome had, I mean, the Romans were certainly capable of being cruel, brutal soldiers, but once you surrendered, they generally lived up to what they were supposed to do, and their armies were certainly disciplined. I mean, what was the old saying? The soldiers feared the centurion more than they feared the enemy.
yeah, something like that. So, yeah, it's definitely a European trait. And it can be a strength, but it can also be a weakness, like we see today. So, so yeah.
Donazo said, "How did we get onto this?" Question mark.
Yes.
I don't know, Donazo.
I mean, I think one of the things we can get from looking at the Arthurian legend, looking back at chivalry, a lot of which was forged while dealing with the Crusades, is how do you deal honestly, honorably, and firmly with other people? It's like, where is the border between, okay, you're a human being, and because of our shared humanity, these, like, I owe you some help, and between, like, okay, I have a border and I have the right to protect my border. I think you can look to, stuff like, certainly at their best, the Knights of the Round Table might be mythical, but as ideals go, they gave us a certain rule for, like, okay, this is how you can be a good knight without being a pushover.
Yeah, and stories
Yeah,
are
that's
also very much food for thought, both with morals and what is the right approach to things. And, children soak these things up, and we have to keep them alive. And, when we feed our children stories like this, then they will get a moral compass that is in many ways inbuilt. How subverted they have become now will, in my opinion, be righted quite quickly if they just get the right input. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
And hopefully it can also help the adults to get their perspective a bit more towards True North. So, that's one of the reasons to do the show.
Yeah, like we really need to be we always say it, we really need to be looking at the older sources. We need to be looking back for information on how we progress now, and I think that's certainly what Kenaz is trying to do on the full notes from the End of Time episodes, which are very interesting, stating about how one might try to navigate the oncoming collapse and the various things that might come from it. I'd recommend anybody giving those a listen, actually. There's a few of them on YouTube. I think most of them are on BitChute, right, Kenaz?
Most of them are on both BitChute and YouTube. I put them on both because
Okay.
we all know
Yeah.
how those things can go.
Yeah.
The
It's
link
spread out across a lot of platforms. That's the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have the link for your YouTube in the description on YouTube for this show. And we could also
I've
post
tweeted
that. Yeah.
I've tweeted your BitChute and your website a couple times. Got SoundCloud. So yeah, plenty of places to listen to those.
Yeah.
Hopefully all of them keep hosting us. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
But yeah,
This
we should
might
probably
be...
have a story
Yeah, I
at
think it's a
some
good
point.
segue for...
Quite soon. Yes.
Yeah, it's a good segue for my story tonight, because it does bring up, taking the right road and making the right decision, and the question of is a certain action right or not. So here is the second story of tonight. King Arthur and the search for the Holy Grail. In Arthur's court there were many virtuous knights and ladies, but the best of all was a beautiful maiden, sister to Sir Percival. She was so good that the evil in the world oppressed her, and she could only be happy when she was praying for all people to be made better. Once a good old man told her what was meant by the Holy Grail. Grail, he said, is the word for the cup out of which our Lord Jesus drank the night that he held the Last Supper with his disciples. Therefore it is called holy. There is a tradition which says that for a long time after the death of Christ, the Holy Grail remained on earth, and anyone who was sick and touched it was healed at once. But then people grew to be so wicked that it disappeared from the earth. It is said that if a person in our day were only good enough, he could see the Holy Grail. Really see it? Asked the maiden eagerly, or see it in a vision? I do not know, answered the good old man, but either one would be a great happiness, for a real sight of it or a vision would show the person who saw it that it was sinless. Then the beautiful maiden prayed more than ever. She became so thin and pale that it seemed as if she were almost transparent, and at last she lay dying. One morning she sent for her brother, Sir Percival, and for his friend Sir Galahad. Sir Percival and Sir Galahad were the two best knights in Arthur's court. They were not so powerful as Sir Launcelot or Sir Geraint or Sir Gareth, but they had purer souls than these. When they came to the bedside of the maiden, she said, "O my brother and my friend, I have seen the Holy Grail. Last night I was awakened by a sound like the music of a silver horn across the hills. It was more beautiful music than any I have ever heard. Then through my window shone a long cold beam of silver light, and slowly across that beam came the Holy Grail. It was red like a beautiful rose, and the light reflected from it covered all the walls with a rosy color, and then it vanished. Now I beg you to seek it, and go to the hall of Arthur and tell all the other knights to take the quest. If they can but see the Grail, it will be a sign that they are good, and that the world is growing better." As she spoke, Sir Galahad's face wore an expression so like her own that Sir Percival was amazed. But the maiden took from the side of her bed a sword belt and gave it to Sir Galahad. "Fair knight," she said, "I have made this golden belt of my hair and woven on it in crimson and silver thread the device of the Holy Grail. Put on this belt, bind your sword to it, and go forth, for you too shall see the Holy Grail." Then Sir Galahad and Sir Percival went away quietly, for they saw that the beautiful maiden had not long to live. That night they went to Arthur's hall. The king was absent with the queen, but most of the knights of the Round Table were there, and to them Sir Galahad and Sir Percival told the vision that Sir Percival's sister had seen. As they spoke, suddenly the torches in the hall were extinguished. There was a loud sound like thunder and a sudden cracking of the roof. Then a beam of light, 7 times stronger than they, streamed into the room. Across the beam stole the Holy Grail. But it was covered by a luminous cloud, so that its shape could not be seen. Slowly it vanished away. There was silence in the hall for a long time. The knights were awestruck and could not speak. At last Sir Percival rose in his seat and said in a low tone, "My sister saw the vision of the Holy Grail, but I, because I am more sinful, have seen it covered with a cloud. Yet, because I wish to see it, I vow to spend 12 months and a day in search of it. I will pray and live as holy life as I can, and perhaps this vision will be mine." Then good Sir Bors, cousin of Sir Launcelot, made the same vow, as did also Sir Galahad and Sir Launcelot and Sir Gawain and many others. After the vows had been taken, King Arthur entered. When all had been explained to him, his face grew sorrowful. "If I had been here," he said, "I should not have allowed you to swear the vow. None of you really saw the Grail. You say it was covered with a cloud." Then Sir Galahad cried out, "My king, I saw the Grail, all crimson like a ruby, and I heard a voice which said, 'O Galahad, follow me.'" "Ah, Galahad," said the king tenderly, "you are fit for this quest, this search, but the others are not. Sir Launcelot is our strongest warrior, but he is not like Sir Galahad. Most of you, my knights, are men with strength and will to right wrongs. That is the work you are fitted for. You have fought in 12 great battles with the heathen, but only one of you is fit for this holiest of visions. Yet go and fulfill your vow." The faces of the knights were downcast. The king continued, "While you are gone, I shall need your strength here at home, but you will be following a wandering fire. Many of you will never return." All the company felt sad. The next day, when the knights departed upon their quest, the king could hardly speak for grief, and many of the knights and ladies wept. Those who had sworn the vow went together to the great gate of the city of Camelot, and there they separated. During the next 12 months, many a poor labourer who had been wronged came to Arthur's court to find a knight who would fight for him, and many a poor widow and maiden. But because so many of the knights of the Round Table were absent, there was little help to be had, and Arthur's face grew sadder and sadder as time went on. At last, after the 12 months and a day had passed, those in Camelot began to look for the return of the knights who had taken the vow. Alas, though they waited all day long, only Sir Gawain, Sir Bors, Sir Percival, and Sir Launcelot returned. In the evening, the knights of the Round Table assembled in the great hall. When each was seated, the king rose and said to those who had been upon the quest, "My lords, I need only look at your faces to know that you have fared ill. I dare not think of those of you who have not come back. And now, Percival, my knight, who next to Galahad has the purest soul, tell me what has happened to you." Sir Percival rose slowly from his chair and said, "Dear my liege, when I left your court on the sad morning that we all set forth, I did not feel the grief that many of the other knights felt. I had been fighting so well, and so many lances had gone down before my stroke, that I was full of confidence in what I could do. I rode happily, planning all the great victories I should win. I was sure if I righted a great many wrongs, I should soon see the Grail. But after many days I began to grow weary. I was riding through rough forests, and the branches bruised me and my horse. There seemed to be no great deeds to do. I could not even slay wild beasts, and so be of use to the poor country people. My bed was on the hard ground, and my food was wild berries. One day I came to a great castle, and there I decided to rest. When I entered, I was warmly greeted and brought to the princess of the castle. I found her to be one whom I had loved long ago in her father's court. I was but a young squire, and she was a great princess, so I had gone away without telling her how dear I held her. She greeted me kindly, and after a time she began to love me. I soon wondered whether I was fit to see the Holy Grail. I thought perhaps I was one of those who were pursuing a wandering fire. And then the people of the castle begged me to marry their princess, to be their lord and live a happy and easeful life. One night I awoke and thought longingly of the Holy Grail. Whether I was fit to see the vision or not, I had at least sworn to seek it for a year and a day, and yet I had not tried 2 months. I rose hastily, dressed, and left the castle. Then for many days I prayed and mourned. At last I sought the holy hermit and told him all I had done and thought since I left Arthur's court. The good hermit, after a short silence, said, "My son, you have not true humility. You have been too proud of your strength, and too sure in the beginning that you were fit for the vision. You have always thought first of yourself and your own glory, and not of the good you could do." I went into the chapel of this hermit and prayed to be relieved of the sin of pride. As I prayed, Sir Galahad entered. He was clad in silver armor, and his face looked like that of an angel. "Oh, my brother," he said, "have you not seen the Grail?" And after I had answered, he said, "From the moment when I left the court of our king, the vision has been with me. It is faint in the daytime, but at night it shines blood red. I see it on the mountains, and in the lakes and on the marshes. It has made me so strong that everywhere I am able to do good. I have broken down many evil customs. I have fought with pagan hordes and been victor, all because of this blessed vision. Percival, I have not long to live. I am going to the great city above, which is more beautiful than any earthly city. Come out with me this night, and before you die you shall see this vision." Then I followed Sir Galahad out of the chapel. We climbed the hill, which was steep and rugged, Sir Galahad going first and his silver armor guiding me. When we came to the top, a storm broke over us, and the lightning seemed to follow us as we descended the hill on the other side. At the bottom of it, there was a great black swamp leading to the sea. It was crossed by a huge bridge built by some forgotten king. Here Sir Galahad left me and ran over the bridge till he reached the sea. His armor shone like a star far away at the edge of the water. And then I saw him no more. I knelt on the black ground and wept, and wished that I was as good as Sir Galahad and could do deeds as he did, not to win glory, but to help those who needed help. And as I wept, I was aware of a great light over me. I looked up and saw a silver beam, and across it slowly moved the Holy Grail. It was no longer muffled in a cloud, but shone crimson as a ruby. I made my way back to the chapel and prayed all the rest of the night. In the morning I found Sir Galahad's body by the sea. He was beautiful as a saint, though he was worn and thin from long self-sacrifice. I buried him, and then turned my steps to Camelot. And now, my Lord Arthur, I shall never fight again. I shall become a monk and pass my life in prayer as my sister did. Among my brother monks there will be very many little deeds of service I can do. Thus I will spend my life." All the knights were very much moved, and the king looked affectionately at Sir Percival, but he did not speak to him. He turned to Sir Gawain and said, "Sir Gawain, was this quest for you?" Then Sir Gawain, always light-hearted and easily turned from one thing to another, said, "Nay, my king, such a search is not for one like me. In a little time I became tired. I talked to a holy man who told me I was not fit for such a vision. So I journeyed till I came to a field of silk pavilions and very many knights and ladies, and with them I lived happily for the year." The good king looked displeased, but his face grew tender as he turned to Sir Bors. "Bors," he said, "good, faithful and honest you have ever been. Tell me what you have seen." Sir Bors, who stood near Sir Launcelot, said, "My Lord Arthur, after I had started on the quest, I was told that madness had fallen upon my kinsman, Sir Launcelot. This so grieved me that I had but little heart to seek for the Holy Grail, yet I sought for it. I believed that if God meant for me to see the vision, he would send it. I travelled till I came to a people who were heathen. They knew much of magic, but nothing of God. I stayed with them and tried to teach them our faith, but they were angry because I would not believe in their gods, and put me into prison. I was there many months in darkness and cold, but I tried to be patient and prayed that my patience would count for something, although I could not do any good deeds. I had at least been faithful, though I failed. One night a stone slipped from a prison wall, and I could see a space of sky with 7 stars set across it. Then slowly across the space glided the Holy Grail. My happiness was great, for I had seen the vision. The next morning a maiden who had secretly converted to our religion released me from prison, and I came hither." Then the king spoke to Sir Launcelot. "My Lancelot, the mightiest of us all, have you succeeded in this quest?" Then Sir Lancelot groaned. "O King," he cried, "your mightiest, yes, and yet far better it would be if I were like Sir Galahad. A great sin is on my soul, and it was to be rid of this sin that I undertook the quest of the Holy Grail. A hermit told me that only by putting this sin away should I ever see the vision. I strove so hard against it that my old sickness came upon me. I became mad and rode up and down among waste places, fighting with small men who overthrew me. The day has been when the very sound of my name would have made them tremble. At last I came to the sea and saw a boat anchored near the shore. I stepped into it, loosed the anchor, and floated away. For 7 days I sailed, and at last came to an old castle. I entered and heard a voice singing. I followed it up 1,000 steps. At last I came to a door which burst open before me. Perhaps I dreamed, and yet I believe I saw the Holy Grail, though it was veiled and guarded by great angels. I thought I saw all this, and then I swooned away. When I came to myself, I was alone in the room. It was many days before I made my way back to Camelot." For a long time there was silence in the hall, and then Sir Gawain said, "Sir King, I can fight, and I always shall fight for you. But I do not believe in this vision. All the knights were mad, like Sir Lancelot. They did not really have the vision, it was but fancy." Then the king spoke gravely to Sir Gawain. "Sir Gawain, you are indeed not fit for such a vision, but you should not doubt that others have seen it. I was right, my knights, when I said that most of you would follow a wandering fire. How many of those who left me have not returned and never will?" The knights looked at the empty chairs. The king went on. "Sir Galahad was the only one who completely saw the vision. He was indeed blessed and fit for such a quest. You who were unfit should have stayed with me to help govern this land." The knights were silent and sad. Then the king said, "My dear knights whom I love, always remember this. Whether you seek a vision, or do humble service as Sir Percival will for his fellow monks, or fight to right wrongs as Sir Lancelot does, whatever you do, your aim must be to make yourself useful to the world by the work of which you are best fitted." The king rose from the round table and left the company, Sir Lancelot following him. Then the other knights departed, one by one, and the great hall was left empty, with its shields glimmering in the moonlight. Okay, so that was our second story for tonight. And quite an interesting, I think, considering all of the moral questions in it and what is the best action to do.
Absolutely. That story was 17 minutes. Oops, sorry, delay.
That is a really brilliant story. I believe that's a retelling from Tennyson's Idylls of the King. But yeah, what I find really fascinating here is the Grail story is a tragedy. Most of the people who go out seeking the Grail will never find it. But it's still a good thing to go and look for the Grail. I mean, it's still the defining moment of Camelot is the Grail quest. So, again, there's a tragedy about this. It's like, the thing which defines Camelot, the thing which defines the Arthurian legend, ultimately destroys King Arthur's court.
Yeah, it's definitely a story of knowing thyself. One moral is that you should know yourself if you are even able to go on the quest, like Sir Gawain. And I'm sorry for butchering any names in there, by the way. Because I think he knew from the start that he wasn't up to it. He found out very early that he wasn't, and then he just went and hung with a bunch of knights and ladies for a year instead of returning to Arthur and helping him run his country. And then you have Galahad, who were up for the quest, and everyone knew it from the start. And he saw it, and then he died, basically. So it seemed almost like a death sentence. So Percival, he sees it and decides to have a drastic change of careers. And then a knight is lost there. Sir Bors, he also sees it, but returns to his duty for his king.
And Sir Bors, who's probably, not a bad knight. I mean, he's in the Round Table. He's a very good knight, but he's certainly not a knight or a character on a par with a Percival, a Galahad, or a Lancelot. But he's the one who comes home and does his duty.
Yeah. And, that's where, keeping faith to the quest comes into picture. He can't do very much, but he decides to keep faith even though he can't, and pray, and in that way finds the Grail. What is interesting of Sir Lancelot is he is the best knight, but he has a huge sin that he has to get rid of to be able to see the Grail. Nobody really shows him how to do that. So it's sort of a spiritual quest without guidance, and those can very easily fail. So that is
maybe Lancelot's quest is to basically be mad in the wilderness, to go, what Lancelot is fighting the hardest fight he's ever had to fight. It's the fight we all have to fight. Lancelot has to fight himself.
Yeah, that is the hardest fight in your life.
And I think he does a really, Lancelot, where the story after this one, it because Guinevere is charged with adultery. It splits what's remaining of the court. I think that in Tennyson, it's one, out of 150 knights go out and 15 come back.
Yeah.
So after that, they get some more knights there. Some of the knights are pro-Lancelot. Some of them don't like Lancelot. That's where Mordred starts spreading trouble. And Guinevere's charged with adultery. And it winds up, Lancelot rescues Guinevere, but of course he's no longer in the court now, and half the knights have left with him. And this is the time when Mordred decides to make his move and take the throne. So that passion with a Lancelot, which Lancelot was trying to get rid of, still comes to the front and still leads to the actions which result in the death of the Round Table.
Yeah. What was more interesting in many ways are Sir Percival's sister and King Arthur. Sir Percival's sister, she sees the Grail and then wants all the knights of the Round Table to seek the Grail so that she can find out that the world has become better, and that is ultimately a selfish wish. And King Arthur don't want them to go because he needs help to keep his realm in order, and that might not be the best thing for the knights. They might have to have a need to go on a purifying search and, face their own sins and everything. So that is also somewhat selfish, though I do see his point. But you see that he thinks that only Sir Galahad was worthy. But more there was more of them who actually saw the Grail, and I do think Lancelot in the end benefited from going to the quest, so he wasn't right either. So it's also a very interesting look on subjective views on a topic, or what to do, what's the best course to take.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can go after a pipe dream the way you can go after an ideal, and sometimes you'll wind up just getting yourself in trouble. I mean, I think the Grail is a good thing to quest for, but as you noted, a lot of the people, most of the knights that came out weren't ready for it. But yet I find even another detail ahead of that: the Grail destroys King Arthur's court. It takes away most of the knights. It sets into motion the stuff that's going to lead to Arthur's death at Mordred's hands. But the Grail also makes Arthur's court immortal. The Grail legends, we will never forget King Arthur's court because King Arthur's court went looking for that Grail. Is it worth being destroyed for an ideal?
Well, that's a question, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
It
that's
is a question.
I think that's mythical power. That's the way I think a lot of the power of this myth comes from. It's because it's a myth and because it's grounded in that deep mythic past. This myth has there's so much power to it because there's so much complexity to it.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you do have to fight essentially a losing battle. As a pagan, sometimes you do have to fulfill a duty. You need to go into a battle where you're probably not going to come out of it, but that doesn't really matter because there's Valhalla at the end of that.
Yeah, another example of that is the Spartans.
And life is not. The life on this earth is not the only one you've got, not the only shot you've got.
Yeah.
Sorry, thanks. I interrupted you.
That's okay. That's sort of the same thing with the Spartans. They lost. They fought their last battle to the bitter end. They lost and became immortal.
Okay. Donna's Oak, who I'm sure I know. I'm sure I know Donna's Oak. If your ideal makes you dead, it is a poop ideal.
Well,
he didn't say poop.
Your ideal doesn't have to. You're going to wind up dead at some point, whatever you do. Maybe it's better to choose a glorious death than to choose an ignoble one that's a few years or even a couple decades later. I mean, sometimes, it's your ideals aren't the things that are going to, the ideals aren't the thing that's going to kill you. Life is going to kill you. Use common sense and everything, but seriously, there is, if the only way to become immortal is to die, well, then become immortal or die, because otherwise you can be mortal and die.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense in a complete way. When you really only have one shot, and that's, well, I guess that in traditional Indo-European spirituality, there's really two shots. There's dying gloriously in battle or achieving total spiritual enlightenment. You gotta do one of the two if you want to go to any sort of afterlife.
Yeah.
In the Indo-European cultures. Kenaz wins this round.
No. I think the quest of the Grail it's one of those things. We could talk about this for another 2 hours. We could easily sit there talking about symbols for the Grail, because the Grail is it's Douglas Calder. There's so much depth and wisdom hidden within that story. I agree with what Tolkien said, that if you analyze a myth too much, you wind up making it dead. But if you just study that myth, if you read that myth, if you just live that, try to just catch the feelings from that myth, I feel like there is so much spiritual information there. And it's, you can read it as a Christian, you can read it as a pagan, you can read it as an atheist, and there's just such a profound fount of wisdom to that story.
Yeah, it's one of those stories
Absolutely.
that you can just ponder over it forever, basically, and still find little nuggets of gold in there. So and that's the best old stories, where the learning never ends, basically. And we have had quite a few of those stories on this show, and it's been very enlightening. So yeah.
It really has. I think we're coming to about a natural point to wrap up at this point. There's probably still, there's definitely still so much more we could cover. There's all sorts of random places in England associated with the Grail. I can probably tweet more about those in the week. But yeah, it's been great to have you on, Kenaz.
No,
It's really
my
nice.
pleasure. It has been really wonderful. I've greatly enjoyed this.
Yeah.
Yeah, the conversation's gone in a few directions. And
yeah.
it's definitely been interesting though. It's really great to have someone so knowledgeable on the topic, because me at least didn't know quite where to start sometimes with this. It's huge.
Yeah. It's been very informative.
Huge amounts of legends.
Yeah, it's been and so much history and knowledge about with the Saxons and the Britons and the Celts and all of that from Britain that I didn't know. Is not a topic I have researched very much. So it's been very informative, and I will probably have to listen again to this myself to soak up all of the information.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. I'd be happy to come on again sometime.
That will probably be...
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be... because there's so many legends still, so we could probably do an Arthur part 2.
Oh, definitely.
And part 3.
Yeah.
It's and there's so much we need to cover regarding old England and stuff. Yeah. Oh, we should totally talk to Leander English sometime. I bet he knows a lot about Beowulf.
No, he's read it the original. He likely does.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I could read some of the original documents, these things. But yes, very much thank you for being on, Kenaz. Is there anything you'd like to plug just now at the end? Any notes on any additional places people can find you? Anything you're up to?
I am at europaschildren.com. My podcast is an irregular thing. I'm working on wrapping up Cross, Grail, and the Ring. And then I was going to submit that for publication, see what goes on from there. But if you keep me at Europa's Children, I took some time off Facebook for Lent. You can also find me on Telegram at Kenaz Filan. If you just mention this, or you send me a personal message so I know you're not like a Bitcoin spammer or an escort, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have about anything I talked about here or anything that I've written.
Nice. So yes, if anybody does have any questions, Kenaz is, I think, very happy to talk about Arthur, because
it's fun to like Arthur's
cool. Yeah. He's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We will get those links out on Twitter and Telegram that you mentioned there, and it's been a pleasure to have you on.
It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. Take care.
So next week we got Easter and Eostra. Probably that Ostara was actually on the 20th, but it has just happened, and we shall be talking about what that is
Oh, by the
next
way,
week.
everyone, happy oh, what's the English word? Equinox.
Equinox, yes.
Yeah. Happy equinox, everyone.
Happy spring equinox
Yeah.
to anyone who celebrates it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So good night, everyone.
Yeah. Have a wonderful Sunday and a wonderful evening, and we will see you again next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.
Bye.